Hi friends, welcome to this latest episode of the Nationalist View, and today we have with us a very special guest, Major Ben Lowsen. Major Lowsen, thank you so much for taking time out from your busy schedule.
Thank you so much, Mr. Anand.
And we are going to talk about Chinese presence in Latin America, and especially in context of the recent developments which happened in Venezuela, where the Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro, so he was taken out of Venezuela by the U.S. forces, taken out in the sense not taken out, but basically brought to United States to bring him to justice. But though on the surface, many analysts initially said that it's primarily because the US is eyeing Venezuelan oil reserves. But if we go a little bit deeper into it, probably it is the Chinese presence in Latin America and Chinese presence in Venezuela, which is kind of the backdoor of United States. So that could have been one of the major reasons. Uh, we'll try and basically, get some perspective from Major Ben Lawson on this. Major Lawson has been a military attaché in Beijing. He's an expert in Mandarin. He advises the U.S. military on Chinese affairs. He's one of the foremost global expert on Chinese affairs, especially when it comes to defense and strategic affairs. So, Major Lawson, my first question is, with Nicolas Maduro out of power, how serious it is a setback for China, and what does it reveal about the depth and expanse of Beijing's presence across Latin America? Also, I want to know, are these countries in this region, are there any countries in this region that have successfully resisted or rolled back Chinese influence, or it has just been a Chinese roller coaster ride?
Thank you for having me here, Mr. Anand. I think you probably overpraised me, but I will do my best. The capture of Maduro, you look for China, and Venezuela was one of their key investments for One Belt, One Road. And so they called Venezuela an all-weather strategic partner. Have something like $10 billion in outstanding loans there. And they've given Venezuela a ton of military equipment as well. So really, Venezuela is sort of the focal point for China's investment in the Western Hemisphere. And it's not just Venezuela, it's all of the countries there. Now, I think the Trump administration has been very clear about focusing on the Western Hemisphere. And so I think it should have been clear that something was going to happen. And I do think this was a big hit to China in the Western Hemisphere. But being that these are OBOR funds, these were sort of trade reserves coming out of their balance of accounts in their export economy, their export-based economy. And so it maybe wasn't critical to China, but if they could have done something good with it, that would have been a great thing for them to do. Another example, I think it's a good example to the rest of the Western Hemisphere that, China represents a threat here to the United States, and that's going to be a problem for us. And what we see is in place like Honduras with the recent presidential election, they've elected, Honduras under the last regime had switched its recognition from Taipei to Beijing for China. Now, with the new administration coming in, it looks like they may very well shift it back to Taipei. So that would certainly represent a loss and resistance to China. So it's possible, and I think the message is, at least in the Trump administration, that you should do that. But I would sound a word of caution. As successful as Trump has been in converting pressure and military power into influence, it takes political will to keep it up. So whether Trump or any potential successor can do that, we have to wait and see.
So, coming back to Venezuela, though you have mentioned, it was kind of one of the prime spots for China. So, how pivotal was Venezuela in China's broader Latin America strategy, if we look at from the Chinese perspective? And now this political shift which has happened, so does it weaken Beijing's leverage across the region when it comes to energy, finance, or diplomacy, and also, defense and strategic affairs?
Yes, I think for a lot of us in the United States, it's exciting to see a dictator like Maduro being taken out of power and to see that sort of political shift. But I'm a little bit cautious because Trump has left the Maduro supporter in charge of Venezuela. So I think it has yet to be seen how much she will bow to Trump's will versus continue with what the Chavistas have been doing all along. Now, as far as China's policies go, Energy-wise, China will still be able to buy oil from Venezuela. It just won't necessarily be that those funds go to support the dictatorship of Venezuela. I think that's what we all hope. So we'll see how that works. As far as finance goes, I think people will be more cautious in Latin America about accepting Chinese finance. And also, China will probably be more cautious about giving it, knowing that it can be cut off at any point in that way. And I think diplomacy is a similar story, where you're going to see notes of caution surrounding China's entrees into the region.
No, there is a very important question which arises that, is China's engagement with Latin America best understood as economic opportunism? Or is it a long-term imperial strategy? Is it part of a long-term imperial strategy aimed at reshaping the Western Hemisphere? Because China believes in the unipolar world. China does not believe in bipolar, and it intends to replace United States as the most powerful nation on the earth. So, how do you see this? Was it just purely economic opportunism, or is it part of the larger imperial strategy?
I would actually say yes and yes to both of those, because certainly, and I do like what you said about the multipolar world. That's China's official line. What it doesn't actually mean that China wants to see other great powers rising. What it actually means is it wants to see the United States declining. And it thinks it's doing that and helping it along with its investments in Latin America. Now, if it can make money on those investments, all the better for China. Again, these are it's capital that it's built up with its export economy, and no country has unlimited resources. China has incredible, deep resources. So many people, there's a lot of talent in China, and they've made a lot of money as well by the government getting out of the way of its economy. Xi Jinping is now going in the opposite direction. He's put the government directly in the path of its economy. It's slowing down. And he's sent all these investments overseas with OBOR, or the Belt and Road Initiative, and many of them are coming back empty because of many reasons. But Venezuela was the rare bright spot where they were actually getting some oil out of that, and they'll continue to get that. But what they can't get necessarily in the Western Hemisphere anymore is the commitment to dictatorship. And I do think your question about imperialism is the right one. And really, because we have seen plenty of Chinese basing in the Western Hemisphere, that's what they want. They want basing, they want military access. They also want the basing and military access to be used as a potential future threat against anybody who might challenge them, up to and including the US. But they'd also want friends within the UN and the broader international system to support them in their efforts and to vote with them and to basically stymie the United States. And I think we're seeing that getting rolled back here.
Given the heft which US has, especially in the Western Hemisphere, do you think a question arises that China actually had bitten more than it can chew?
So it's a good question. And I think one of the key points of China's sort of setback here is that it does not yet have a world-class deploying military. It can't exert military force abroad yet. And so well, it can talk about things like an all-weather strategic partner, but it can't support them. So I do think its basing efforts ultimately were to create the sort of threat against the United States and other countries in the region to say that, China can have its way in the region. So I do think it has exposed a weakness on that front, at least for now. Although the caution is China, much like we saw in the Taiwan Strait in the third crisis in 1996, where China was not able to exert any force in the Taiwan Strait. Since then, in those 30 intervening years, they've built up their military in some very specific ways to be able to exert a ton of force right there. And so I think using modern technology and the investment that we're pouring still into China, they are going to build up a force to be able to threaten the United States and free countries all over the world.
Major Lawson, in one of your earlier answers, you mentioned, you talked about Belt and Road Initiative. Now, we know that Belt and Road Initiative is at the core of China's economic plan, as far as, increasing its heft across the world is considered. And India is also opposed to the Belt and Road Initiative. And in Latin America, I think most of the countries, as far as I know, correct me if I am wrong, but they had become a large number of countries had become part of this Belt and Road Initiative. So we have seen, in Pakistan also the BRI is not working because of the militancy in the regions like Balochistan And we've also seen in some other countries also, it is not working. There is in Central Asia also, there is a lot of resistance from the local population to Belt and Road Initiative. But when it comes to Latin America, so that kind of resistance was, if it was there, it was not registered on the global map. But now with China, really getting a huge setback in Venezuela. So do you think that this Belt and Road Initiative is, if I may say, is an ICU or is on ventilator as far as the Latin American region is concerned, or the Western
I,
Hemisphere? Yeah.
that's a good question. I think it was always sick. I think many, if not most, of its investments went straight into corruption in foreign countries. And you have places like Hambantota in Sri Lanka, where it was simply used to corrupt a local leader with money. And then what we saw was the local population rebelled against that sort of thing. I would also point out that China had Sri Lanka give them a concession for the port of Hambantota after they could no longer pay off the debt, uh, which is the very thing that China has railed against for so long, since Tiananmen at least. And so I think it was always sick. I think now it's even sicker. It's I think lacking military power to back it, it was always resistible. The only reason why people weren't resisting it was because of corrupt local leaders, or even if not corrupt local leaders, other leaders, like business leaders who were making money from China and China making inroads that way to allow what it was doing. And that's sort of the problem we have in the United States and other countries around the world, where we need to resist sort of this investment, even if it's not officially Belt and Road. But wherever Xi Jinping sends his money, corruption follows. And that's kind of his goal there. So it was sick to begin with. Now, hopefully, we're seeing that we can push back against it.
Mr. Lawson, no, we have seen that Beijing heavily relies on authoritarian regimes, especially in Latin America, to entrench its influence. So, what are the vulnerabilities of this approach, which has got exposed now, especially after what happened in Venezuela?
I do think it's a highly vulnerable approach, but it takes perspective and foresight. Really, what we're talking about is the free world versus the authoritarian, or I would even say the slave world. Because people, when they have a choice, they don't want dictatorship. We're seeing that in Iran today, and we see it all over the world. Whenever the people have a free choice, they do not choose the system of government that China is offering. And so when China puts its money out in that way to create corruption and doubt, I think what we're seeing is that even though people want to make money, and money is very often welcome, the security aspect and the need for freedom are winning out. And I think if you can put the case in that way, and China is making it, with its aggression, is making it easier and easier to make that case, we will see people resisting Chinese money. And I think we'll see democratic lawmaking bodies making laws, like kind of like India's done, blocking out TikTok, where we can find ways to resist it effectively.
So, talked about, TikTok. So, like beyond trade and energy. So, how concerned should the world be about, China's growing intelligence, cyber and military access, especially if we talk in context of Latin America? So, militarily, okay, they might be, in conventional terms. So, there it might be a setback for them, or they might be basically on a, kind of a sticky wicket. But we know the kind of network which Chinese intelligence has, and especially the kind of cyber and military access in Latin America which they created. So, what are the global consequences of this expansion? And if we also look at specifically in context of Latin America.
Mr. Anand, it's very interesting. China, over the past 40 or 50 years, has experienced essentially no threat. Under the good auspices of the United States and the free world, we have protected China's ability to grow, and indeed the ability of every country, small to large, to grow, and they have grown. The difference with China is that they've largely put their largesse into military intelligence and security, despite the lack of threat. And why is that? It's in order to threaten other countries and to take a dominant role wherever it is able to do so. So, looking at the Western Hemisphere, I would use the analogy of the game of Go, where players will put their stones all over the board, and at the beginning, it looks very skeletal and it doesn't look like there's much there, but from one stone, you can grow a lot of power. So we're still, I think, in the earlier stages of China's development within the Western Hemisphere, where they've laid out a fair number of stones and it's actually starting to coalesce into something. And it's creating a threat for the US. So you have the space base down in Argentina. You have an intelligence base that they've grown in Cuba last year. And so we see the stones coming down in Venezuela as a key military, if not ally, a partner for sure. So China, you know, just to see it from the Chinese perspective, you don't want allies. Actually, traditionally in the PRC thought, allies are people that you're beholden to and that will tie you down and waste away your resources. And I think what we're seeing now is that they're being hurt by that, as they're not defending their so-called all-weather partner. And I think that is the great vulnerability there. And there's that strategic military vulnerability which they will address, and I think there's the ideological vulnerability of the Chinese system importing slavery wherever it goes, and we see literal slavery in the U.S. and some to some extent. We see it, of course, in China, de jure slavery under the law. We see corruption in the casino that they tried to put into Guam. And we see that we are able to fight back against that. And I would point out Keith Cratch and his Clean Network initiative under the first Trump administration, where we were able to push back simply by explaining what the PRC was trying to do. We were able to push back successfully against China. So I think that vulnerability to the truth, to the evidence that people see with their eyes, is one of the great ones, because ultimately it's about the free world versus the slave world, and there's really no choice if you're a free person what you're going to fight for. So my final point here would be to tell the truth. Let's make sure we tell the truth about the PRC, and I think we will win out.
So I'll, end up the conversation with two small questions. One is that you're absolutely bang on target that we need to tell the truth. But the kind of, in the information warfare, the kind of dominance which China is displaying in terms of narrative building. So how do we basically do that? And the question linked to that is, while US is trying to, you know, push back China. So what about its Western allies? So are they really actually basically deeply concerned about it? And if they're deeply concerned about it, so does it get reflected in any of their actions or policies?
I think 10 years ago, other Western allies, especially in Europe, were not sufficiently concerned about it. In fact, I think they were almost completely ignorant. Though I found in the last decade that has made a 180-degree turnaround. I find there's a lot more concern, and you see it with things like the Russia's war on Ukraine. And Europe initially was still buying oil from Russia, even as China was fully supporting Russia's invasion. And it was really just this incredible disconnect. And I think finally, people in Europe are starting to see and understand the danger to them. Of course, we're just on the other side of the Pacific from China. It's a long distance, but it's a short way. So we've understood this danger for quite some time, and there's a history in the Pacific as well. So we know to watch out for that. But in Europe, after Ukraine, you had in the Czech Republic the attempted assassination of the Taiwanese president. So you see, China doesn't care for any laws. It's going to send its money wherever it's welcome and bring corruption with it and try and corrupt society. So, is there any case in which China's money can create development? Possibly. But the only way is through strength on the side of anybody receiving any of that finance and a close watch on what the PRC is doing, because the influence is there, the party committees are there in every company now. And it's you have to be on the watch for it. Otherwise, you will be taken over by it. It's not good, but it is resistible.
Thank you, Major Lawson. Always a pleasure to talk to you and your sharp insights and perspective. And thank you for taking time out from your busy schedule. And we hope to host you back again very soon. And thank you, viewers, for watching this show. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.